You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. This is the first in a two-part series on talking about your accomplishments. It's one of an ongoing sequence of podcasts that focus on the job interview process. Along with your previous experience, your greatest accomplishment is one of the topics that is sure to come up in almost any interview. This question appears in a variety of forms. What was your proudest achievement? What was your most significant accomplishment? What do you consider to be your greatest success? No matter how it's asked, you should be ready with a reply. Interviewers want to hear something important that you handled. Pick an achievement that is significant to you and that is rich in detail. These two qualities will make it easy to provide examples, which is the main theme of this series. In this episode, we'll be listening to a bad and good version of a recent graduate discussing his greatest accomplishment. We'll focus on language for providing examples of the positive personal characteristics that our previous success demonstrates. Then, in part 2 of this series, we'll hear another good example of someone with more job experience, and we'll examine a 4-part structure for telling our success stories. First, let's quickly review the bad example. We'll go back to Alexander's interview with Michael in the electronics store. As you listen, consider the following questions. Then, we'll examine the answers in the debrief. First, does Alex put his success into an organized, articulate story? And second, does he present his accomplishment in a way that provides examples of skills and qualities that will be useful at his new job?
Right, got that. So what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment?
I think my greatest achievement is comprehending Klima's masterwork, World as Consciousness and Nothing.
Okay.
In this book, he argues that everything exists only because we will it to exist. You see, he means that you, I, everyone, we are all God. Do you understand?
Yes, got that. Alexander, do you really think this is the right job for you? Are you sure you can handle it?
Are you kidding? No problem. You should try reading Klima. That's hard work.
I think we'll all agree that Alexander has not presented his experience in the most favorable light. First, it doesn't seem as though he has chosen the best story to tell. We recall from previous episodes that he's recently graduated with a master's degree, a great accomplishment. Yet, in his story, he focuses on reading just one book. Though this book may be of great personal significance to Alex, from the employer's perspective, it doesn't reflect as favorably on him as, for example, the completion of his thesis. He hasn't chosen a good example to provide. In addition to his poor choice of story to tell, there are some problems with the way Alex tells the story. He focuses on details that are irrelevant to his interviewer rather than on those that draw attention to his positive personal attributes. Again, he has done a poor job of providing examples of how his experience demonstrates relevant skills and characteristics. Finally, Alex is not likely to win friends by placing his academic accomplishments in a higher position than the job he's interviewing to do. He implies that working in an electronics store is easy compared to his university experience. Instead of taking this approach, he should be discussing how his academic excellence has prepared him for success in the workplace. Obviously, none of us are likely to make all the mistakes that Alex has made. But still, his poor performance provides us with a useful example because it highlights several key issues that we should pay attention to when we present our accomplishments. After his original bad interview experience, Alex went back and got some advice at the job search agency. He attended a couple of workshops, and in his second attempt to find a job, he is much more successful.
Okay, So that gives me a pretty good idea of your experience. Now, I was wondering if you could tell me something about what you consider to be your greatest accomplishment.
That would definitely be my master's thesis, which I just finished. It took me 18 months to write, and I'm very proud of it.
For example, what exactly are you proud of?
Well, for one thing, working on a project like that really requires you to be very goal-oriented and to work independently, because your advisors are not there to hold your hand.
I see.
And at one point, like many people, I thought I was going to give up, but I stuck with it. You have to be a self-starter and highly motivated. I definitely matured a lot working on this project.
Yes, I bet you did.
At the same time, it's important to have very strong interpersonal skills. Because you have to work with your advisor and, in my case, a committee. You need to have the ability to work and communicate with different types of people and to integrate constructive criticism into your approach.
Sounds like you got a lot out of it.
Yes, it was a huge growing experience, and I learned a lot, both about being independent and about working with people.
In this example, Alex does a much better job of taking a relevant accomplishment, writing his master's thesis, and telling a convincing story about it that demonstrates to his interviewer useful skills and attractive characteristics. Let's look at some of the language he uses. After setting the context and giving some background, things we'll focus on more in part 2 of this series, Alex describes how he overcame a challenge.
Well, for one thing, working on a project like that really requires you to be very goal-oriented and to work independently, because your advisors are not there to hold your hand.
I see.
And at one point, like many people, I thought I was going to give up, but I stuck with it. You have to be a self-starter and highly motivated. I definitely matured a lot working on this project.
What is the challenge Alex overcame? At one point, he was going to give up on writing his thesis, but he stuck with it. That is, he continued through to the end, even though it was difficult. Accompanying this story, he uses a number of very vivid, effective expressions for describing the positive personal attributes and skills that his success demonstrates. He is goal-oriented, able to work independently, a self-starter, and highly motivated. These are all phrases that describe characteristics of individual or personal excellence that are very attractive to a potential employer. It is important to recognize that the question about significant accomplishments is a behavioral question. This type of question seeks to understand habits in your past behavior because these habits can predict future successes. You can help control the impression your interviewer has of your past behavior by using strong, vivid language to describe the skills and personal characteristics that your experience demonstrates. In a sense, you are doing the interviewer's work for him by giving him words they can use to describe your strengths. Let's listen to a few more strong, vivid examples of language that describes independence and individual excellence.
My work on this project shows that I am self-disciplined and resourceful.
I consider myself to be an enterprising, energetic person, and that really comes out in this situation.
As you can see, I am both detail-oriented and a determined problem solver.
One of my biggest advantages is my ability to adapt well to new situations.
This shows my willingness to be an assertive communicator when necessary.
Being in charge of this team taught me the importance of being a decisive leader.
It was a wonderful experience for me because I really thrive on challenge.
You may have noticed how his story essentially has two parts. First, he talks about how finishing his thesis required him to be independent. Second, he focuses on the more cooperative and teamwork aspect of the project.
At the same time, it's important to have very strong interpersonal skills. Because you have to work with your advisor, and in my case, a committee. You need to have the ability to work and communicate with different types of people, and to integrate constructive criticism into your approach.
In this section, he uses more key phrases such as ability to work and communicate with different types of people, and integrate constructive criticism into your approach. Integrate means to take in or use. Constructive criticism is feedback that is meant to be useful and positive rather than negative. In addition to traits of personal excellence, cooperative and teamwork skills are highly valued by employers. What other phrases and language can we use to describe teamwork-oriented qualities?
I've got a sincere interest in good teamwork, and I'm sensitive to the needs of other people.
My success in this project demonstrates a quality of which I am very proud, my broad-minded and flexible perspective in dealing with people.
Through the whole process, I have remained a committed team player.
The reason I love this work is that I am truly a conscientious person at heart.
I pride myself on being a very cooperative individual.
Part of what makes me such an effective team member is that I am a very eager learner.
As with the earlier language we studied, you'll find all of these phrases in the study notes with full definitions and further example sentences. From the HR perspective, notice how the interviewer listens actively to keep Alex talking. He gives him continuous signals and prompts, such as, for example, and I can see what you mean, to lend him confidence and to let him know that he's listening carefully. Sometimes interviewees can use these kinds of phrases to encourage our potential employers to share more information with us.
That's very interesting.
Please go on.
Please continue.
I can see what you're saying.
Would you mind expanding on that a little?
Could you give me an example?
There's one more type of language that we'll study in this episode. At the end of the first section, did you hear the phrases Alex uses to sum up how writing his master's thesis contributed to his growth in the key skills he mentioned?
I definitely matured a lot working on this project.
Also, at the very end of the dialogue, Alexander uses another statement to summarize his personal development.
Yes, it was a huge growing experience, and I learned a lot, both about being independent and about working with people.
These types of statements help give your speech a sense of closure, the feeling that you've said something whole and complete, and they help summarize your main point. What are some other phrases we can use to do this?
These are definitely areas where I developed a lot during this time.
Through this experience, I made great strides in these key skills.
I would say that this was one of the most important factors in my personal growth.
Now, let's practice some of the language we've learned today. First, we'll focus on giving examples of skills and personal characteristics. Then, we'll look at prompting people to talk. Let's start with skills and personal characteristics. You'll hear a series of cues. Each cue will consist of the beginning of a sentence, for example, my work on this project, followed by one or two key words, such as good teamwork and cooperation. After the beep, construct a sentence by adding words to put the two parts together. For example, you might say, I believe my work on this project demonstrates both good teamwork and cooperation. Give it a try.
My success in this project. Committed team player.
I consider myself an assertive communicator and a cooperative individual.
I pride myself on adapt well to new situations.
My success is closely connected with highly self-motivated and goal-oriented.
Now, let's listen to some example answers. Of course, your answers may differ from these.
My success in this project. Committed team player.
Answer. My success in this project is certainly due in large part to my being a committed team player.
I consider myself an assertive communicator and a cooperative individual.
Answer. I consider myself to be both an assertive communicator and a very cooperative team player.
I pride myself on adapt well to new situations.
Answer. I pride myself on my ability to adapt well to new situations.
My success is closely connected with highly self-motivated and goal-oriented.
Answer. My success is closely connected with the fact that I am both highly self-motivated and goal-oriented.
For the second practice, let's review encouraging people to talk. In this practice, each cue will consist of a statement made by a candidate or an interviewer. After the beep, use some of the language we've studied today to encourage him or her to talk. For example, if the person says, I've been working in finance for 10 years, you could say, that's very interesting. Or, please go on. Respond appropriately according to the situation. Let's begin.
Basically, banking just wasn't for me. I don't know if this is interesting to you.
It was just not the right time to look for a job. Do you know what I mean?
Basically, our benefits improve a lot after you have been with the company for 1 year.
Now, let's listen to some example answers. Of course, there are many possible correct responses.
Basically, banking just wasn't for me. I don't know if this is interesting to you.
Answer. It's very interesting. Please go on.
It was just not the right time to look for a job. Do you know what I mean?
Answer. I can see what you mean.
Basically, our benefits improve a lot after you have been with the company for 1 year.
Answer. Do you mind expanding on that a little?
That concludes this episode, which was the first in a 2-part series on talking about your accomplishments in job interviews. Under the theme, Provide Examples, we've examined how to use your accomplishments to demonstrate skills and characteristics that will be attractive to your employer. In the second part, we'll look at a 4-part structure for telling a success story, including providing context, recounting your role, discussing what you're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. You're listening to the second in a two-part series on talking about accomplishments. This is one of an ongoing sequence of podcasts on job interviews. The theme for this episode and the last is provide examples. In the first part, we looked at a bad and good version of a recent university graduate talking about his academic successes. We studied how to use our accomplishments to demonstrate skills and characteristics that will be attractive to our potential employer. In this episode, we examine another good response to the question about previous experience. We'll be looking at someone with a little more job experience. Yala Santos is an HR specialist who is working in a manufacturing company. She now has an opportunity to interview for an HR manager position in a business unit of a fast-moving consumer goods company, Fun Beverages International. Let's listen to how Yala deals with talking about her greatest achievement. Ordinarily, when responding to the question about your most significant accomplishment, it's very important that you prepare to tell a story that is organized and articulate. That means the story should be well-structured and flow smoothly. Though there are many ways to make your presentation, Yala uses the same general format that I like to follow. 1. You'll probably need to set up the story by providing some context. Where were you? What was the situation? What was at stake? That is, what did you stand to lose or gain? 2. Recount your role in the situation. How were you involved? 3. Discuss what you did, including any analysis or problem solving, any process you set up, and any obstacles you had to overcome. 4. Reveal the outcome and what made you proud. Whereas Alex gave us a good example of how someone with limited job experience might deal with the greatest achievement question, Yala shows us how someone with a more traditional employment record might address this query. As you listen, try to answer the following questions. 1. What was the project Yala was working on? 2. What was her role in it? 3. What did she do? 4. What was the outcome?
Great, Yala. That covers previous experience. Now, could you tell me a little about what you consider to be your most significant achievement?
Let's see. At the beginning of last year, Global Headquarters decided to harmonize the assessment and evaluation process for all business units worldwide into one global performance management system.
So, like a single integrated system.
Exactly. It's part of a global effort to provide a single interlinked database for human resources.
Sounds like a challenging project.
Yes, indeed. Especially because we only had 10 months to get it off the ground.
Really?
Yeah, 10 months from planning to launch. My manager called a meeting and we immediately formed a task force. I was placed in charge of localization and documentation, and I played a key role by analyzing and solving a number of problems.
What type of problems?
Well, for example, I anticipated that sales and marketing would need to know all the key performance indicators in advance, because training on the new system wouldn't begin until after they had already completed their planning process for 2008.
Sounds like a pretty major issue.
Yes, and obviously a seamless transition with sales was very important for our BU's bottom line. So I collaborated with the sales division to develop sample evaluations for all sales and marketing functions. Then I coordinated with them to develop a series of pre-launch trainings to get everyone up to speed.
Did it work?
Yes, I'm proud to say it did. We boosted productivity by at least 10% because of our actions. It was hard work, but we got extremely positive feedback throughout the whole process. And despite a few hitches, things went pretty smoothly.
Great. Sounds like a success.
Yes, I think my role in this project demonstrates a number of important personal qualities. Being poised under deadline pressure, being proactive and having long-range vision, practicing a flexible approach, and definitely being a good team player, because so much of it required coordinating and mediating between different departments.
Yala has done a good job of telling an articulate, organized story. Let's look at it piece by piece. How does she begin? First, she sets the context.
Let's see. At the beginning of last year, global headquarters decided to harmonize the assessment and evaluation process for all business units worldwide into one global performance management system.
So, like a single integrated system.
Exactly. It's part of a global effort to provide a single interlinked database for human resources.
Yala's company has harmonized the employee assessment and evaluation process all across the world. Here, harmonize means that they have made sure all business units, that is, all parts of the company, are using the same system. From the HR perspective, notice how the interviewer uses the clarifying technique of echoing Yala. So, like a single integrated system. Such echoing both confirms that the interviewer has understood Yala and encourages her to keep talking. Let's look at some more phrases for setting the context of your accomplishments.
Our company had been undergoing restructuring, so employees needed to adapt to new ways of doing things.
Towards the end of 2007, we got a big new customer and started receiving huge orders.
All through 2006, a series of budget cuts really put our department under financial pressure.
Setting the context generally involves giving a time frame and introducing the background to a problem. In the first example phrase we listened to, notice the use of the past perfect continuous tense. Had been undergoing restructuring to set the background, coupled with the past tense, needed to adapt to pose the problem. Getting back to Yala's story, how does it continue? After having given the background, she now recounts the situation and her role in it.
My manager called a meeting and we immediately formed a task force. I was placed in charge of localization and documentation, and I played a key role by analyzing and solving a number of problems.
What type of problems?
In this part of her story, Yala focuses specifically on her role in the project. She was in charge of localization, that is, of adapting the global system to local circumstances. This generally involves translation and dealing with cultural issues. In addition, she took care of documentation. That is, she oversaw the writing of training and user manuals. Now, listen to some further phrases that we can use for discussing our role in a project.
Upper management decided that corporate culture was a key to surviving the changes, so a committee was set up to create a training plan. I was put in charge of getting employee feedback on company values.
Our existing supply chain couldn't really handle the size of the orders, so the key challenge was to strengthen our logistics system, and fast.
Employee morale really went downhill, so my role was to devise innovative ways to increase team spirit.
In this part of our success story, we'll often use such constructions as, I was put in charge of, or the key challenge was to, or my role was to. Make sure to answer the questions, what was the situation, and how did you fit in? Getting back to the dialogue, after recounting her role in the situation, Yala's next step is to discuss what she did. This includes any obstacles she overcame, problems she analyzed and solved, and processes she set up. Listen.
Well, for example, I anticipated that sales and marketing would need to know all the key performance indicators in advance, because training on the new system wouldn't begin until after they had already completed their planning process for 2008.
In this section, Yala uses a strong verb for describing foresight, that is, analyzing and predicting problems. She anticipated a problem with the launch of the new system, namely, that sales and marketing would not have time to set up targets for the new year. HR would not start giving training in using the new key performance indicators until after the sales force had already prepared their goals for the next year.
Sounds like a pretty major issue.
Yes, and obviously a seamless transition with sales was very important for our BU's bottom line. So I collaborated with the sales division to develop sample evaluations for all sales and marketing functions. Then I coordinated with them to develop a series of pre-launch trainings to get everyone up to speed.
To solve this problem, Yala performed several key management communication functions. She collaborated with the sales division and coordinated with them to develop pre-launch training. Thus, she avoided the problem and ensured a seamless transition, that is, a smooth passage into using the new performance management system. Making sure that sales had no problems with the new system was, of course, important to the bottom line, or profit, of the company. Anticipate, collaborate, and coordinate are all great, vivid verbs for describing job success. Let's hear a few more phrases that contain excellent verbs for showing analytical, management, and communication skills.
I headed up a team of 6 to tackle the problem.
First, we spent 3 months carefully evaluating the issue.
I improved the process, consolidating several steps.
We prioritized company team building through a series of internal promotions and activities.
I organized a committee and delegated key tasks.
After discussing how she solved the problem, Yala moves on to the fourth and final step of her story. She reveals the outcome and what made her proud.
Did it work?
Yes, I'm proud to say it did. We boosted productivity by at least 10% because of our actions. It was hard work, but we got extremely positive feedback throughout the whole process. And despite a few hitches, things went pretty smoothly.
Great. Sounds like a success.
Yala's efforts were successful. Despite a few hitches, that is, minor problems, things went pretty smoothly. Notice how she quantifies her success. Her role in the project helped boost productivity by 10%. Using numbers makes your accomplishment vivid and strong. Let's now listen to a few more examples of positive outcomes.
As a result of my efforts, we measured a productivity increase of 5% in my department, which translated into savings to the company of $56,000.
The new system was successful, and I'm happy to say that our hard work really paid off.
Not only have surveys shown a great increase in employee satisfaction, but we can all feel the difference.
It was a very rewarding experience, both professionally and personally.
How does the dialogue finish? In the final section of her response, Yala uses the type of language that we studied in part 1 of this series to discuss how her work reflects positively on her character. She names several positive professional qualities that her performance in that project demonstrate.
Yes, I think my role in this project demonstrates a number of important personal qualities. Being poised under deadline pressure, being proactive and having long-range vision, practicing a flexible approach, and definitely being a good team player, because so much of it required coordinating and mediating between different departments.
She says she is poised under deadline pressure and proactive. She has long-range vision and practices a flexible approach. Finally, she is definitely a good team player and able to coordinate and mediate communication. Before we finish, let's review what we've learned in this episode and the last. We'll practice joining the strong, vivid verbs we studied for describing job successes in this episode with the great phrases we learned for demonstrating personal qualities in Part 1. You'll hear a series of cues that consist of a job accomplishment and one or two professional attributes and skills. Use each cue to construct a sentence relating the accomplishment with the attribute. For example, if you hear coordinate task force meetings, sensitive to the needs of other people, you can say, my coordination of task force meetings really demonstrates my sensitivity to the needs of other people. Let's begin.
Innovate a new database solution. Enterprising and energetic.
Coordinate a team effort to increase sales. Determine problem solver.
Collaborated with IT to solve the problem. Long-range vision, good team player.
How did you do? Let's listen to some example answers, bearing in mind that there are many possible correct responses.
Innovate a new database solution. Enterprising and energetic.
Answer. The innovative approach I took to designing the database demonstrates my enterprising and energetic spirit.
Coordinate a team effort to increase sales. Determine problem solver.
Answer. Coordinating this team effort to increase sales shows that I am a determined problem solver.
Collaborated with IT to solve the problem. Long-range vision, good team player.
Answer. I collaborated with IT to solve the problem. I think this demonstrates that I have long-range vision and am a good team player.
That concludes this two-part series on talking about your accomplishments with the theme Provide Examples. In Part 1, we studied giving examples of desirable personal characteristics. In this episode, we've looked at a variety of useful language for describing management and communication skills. Also, we learned a 4-step process for telling an organized, articulate story that effectively demonstrates a significant achievement. Let's review that structure. 1. Set up the story by providing some context. 2. Recount your role in the situation. 3. Discuss what you did, including any analysis or problem solving, any process you set up, and obstacles you had to overcome. 4. Reveal the outcome and what made you proud. Thanks for listening. You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move.
Hello, my name is Jennifer, and I'll be hosting the next couple of podcasts as we continue to look at the language and skills of interviewing for jobs in English. So far in this series, we've examined 2 common questions that you will likely be asked in almost any interview. They were, tell me about your previous experience, and what is your most significant accomplishment? In this episode, we will likewise deal with another extremely common question. Unfortunately, it's almost as challenging to answer as it is popular to ask. It requires you to think about possible problems with your working style and personality, and to give an answer that demonstrates professionalism and the ability to present your weakness as a strength. That's right, you guessed it. The question is, what's your greatest weakness? Talking about your weaknesses tests a unique skill. It investigates your ability to present a drawback as an advantage. Thus, the theme of this episode is be positive. And that's the main point that we'll be focusing on. We'll be listening to 2 examples, one good and one bad. Let's listen briefly first to the bad example. You may recall that Alexander is interviewing with Michael for a supervisor job in an electronics store.
Right, so moving on now. What's your greatest weakness?
Michael, for me, I like the simple things in life. Material things don't interest me much. My personal freedom is much more important than being rich.
I see.
I guess that's why I'm working in an electronics store and not on Wall Street.
Yeah, I guess that's why we're all working here.
Alexander has not helped himself with his reply to this question. In fact, he has probably hurt his chances of getting the job. But surprisingly, the problem with Alex's response is not so much in the weakness or flaw he chose, but more in how he presents that flaw. What was Alexander's weakness?
Right, so moving on now. What's your greatest weakness?
Michael, for me, I like the simple things in life. Material things don't interest me much. My personal freedom is much more important than being rich.
Alex says, material things don't interest me much. Material means real, physical things. The things that can be bought with money, like cars, TVs, and houses. Alex is saying he is not interested in financial gain, in being rich. Alex's weakness is certainly sincere, which is much better than making something up. But let's consider it from the employer's perspective, something Alexander fails to do. What do companies want? They are on the lookout for staff who will help them to make money, but who also value human relations and the satisfaction of a job well done. In other words, Alex's weakness is also a strength. But does Alex present it this way?
I guess that's why I'm working in an electronics store and not on Wall Street.
Yeah, I guess that's why we're all working here.
Alex's response falls far short of a good reply. When talking about a weakness, there are generally 2 things we want to do. 1, present it in a positive light. That is, look on the bright side. And 2, talk about what steps we have taken or are taking to overcome our weakness. But Alexander does neither of these things. Instead, he probably makes the worst move possible. He cracks a joke about people who work in electronic stores, implying that the job is actually beneath him. Now that we have an idea of what we shouldn't do, let's listen to a good example of what we should do. We'll rejoin Sherry from Hong Kong, another recent graduate, as she is interviewing with a big accounting firm. Whilst we listen, see if you can answer the following questions. 1. What is Sherry's weakness? 2. Did this weakness affect her GPA or exam scores? How? 3. Does Sherry explain the positive aspects of the weakness she describes?
Great, Sherry. All right, let's move on to another question. What do you think your greatest weakness is?
Well, seeing as I'm a single mother, I'm coming from a non-traditional background, and you might say that's a weakness.
In what ways?
I've had to make a lot of sacrifices. For example, while doing my master's, I had to work part-time, which meant that I've done part of my degree during night school. Being so busy has also had some impact on my GPA. But you know, I think my non-traditional background gives me an edge in many ways over many of my peers.
How so?
I've learned a sense of responsibility, good time management skills, and I've become more mature very quickly. I'm confident that I'm ready to be a strong contributor in a challenging work environment.
Sherry's response does both of the things we talked about earlier. 1. She presents her weakness in a positive light. And 2. She talks about how she overcame it. Let's go through her response piece by piece. How does she first identify her weakness?
Well, seeing as I'm a single mother, I'm coming from a non-traditional background, and you might say that's a weakness.
Sherry's weakness is to come from a non-traditional background. In academic or professional terms, non-traditional refers to anyone who does not follow the conventional or standard career path. Older applicants, people with resume gaps, handicapped employees, etc., all fit into the category non-traditional. In Sherry's case, she believes being a single mother makes her non-traditional. Notice, however, how she uses tentative or careful language to identify her weakness. You might say that's a weakness, she says. It's good to be tentative about your weakness. Doing so makes your statement less final or conclusive, thus preparing your listener for considering the other side of the coin, your weakness as a strength. What are some other ways to identify your weakness tentatively?
I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, so sometimes I get kind of hung up on the details of things.
Well, I have a tendency to overwork. So for me, maintaining a work-life balance is a challenge and a priority, both for my personal sake and for my long-term performance. There are several types of tentative language in these examples. Modal verbs like might and could, qualifiers like bit of and kind of, and phrases such as I tend to or I have a tendency to. Also, it's often better to describe a problem as a challenge because this demonstrates a positive attitude. When Sherry says being non-traditional is a weakness, how does the interviewer respond?
In what ways?
I've had to make a lot of sacrifices. For example, while doing my master's, I had to work part-time, which meant that I've done part of my degree during night school. Being so busy has also had some impact on my GPA.
The interviewer is careful to clarify Sherry's statement. She gets specific examples from Sherry by asking, in what ways? Getting specific examples is an important skill for the interviewer. Let's look at a few more phrases for doing this.
Could you be more specific?
Could you give me some examples?
What do you mean by that?
Sherry is quite clever in choosing her examples. Working part-time, completing a degree in night school, and having a lower GPA. These are all things that will seem like flaws or problems in Sherry's record. But by strategically including them as part of her answer to the weakness question, she is able to re-present these problems in a positive light. Another way to say this is that she puts a positive spin on her problem. The turn or transition to describing weakness as strength is the key moment in Sherry's response. Let's listen to how she does this.
But you know, I think my non-traditional background gives me an edge in many ways over many of my peers.
To put a positive spin on her non-traditional background, Sherry uses an idiom. She says her background gives her an edge over many of her peers. This means it gives her an advantage over her competitors. Let's practice some more language that can be used to put our weaknesses in a positive light. As you listen, keep in mind that these are just suggestions. Each individual case will be a little different. But actually, this also works to my advantage in many situations because I often spot problems that other people don't see.
Of course, it's a double-edged sword, because I'm a highly effective and productive person.
In these examples, we hear a couple more phrases for making the transition from weakness to strength. We can say something actually works to our advantage, or that it's a double-edged sword. That is, it has a bad side and a good side. After putting a positive spin on her disadvantage, the last thing that Sherry needs to do, if possible, is discuss ways in which she is overcoming or has already overcome this weakness.
I've learned a sense of responsibility, good time management skills, and I've become more mature very quickly.
Sherry has learned a sense of responsibility, good time management skills, and she has become more mature. You can refer back to the earlier episodes on talking about accomplishments for more ways to describe positive characteristics. How else can we describe overcoming a weakness? Let's listen to some more examples.
As I've matured as a person and an employee, I've become much better at knowing when it's time to analyze something carefully and when it's time to let it go. I think this has made me both more effective and more productive, the best of both worlds.
I'm finding that by paying attention to my tendency to overextend myself, I'm able to maintain a higher level of consistent effort, and that's having a positive impact on my job performance. Phrases like, by paying attention to my tendency to, and it's the best of both worlds, can help you construct an effective response. Returning to the listening, the last thing Sherry does is finish off her response with a positive final comment.
I'm confident that I'm ready to be a strong contributor in a challenging work environment.
This type of comment, which reflects a positive attitude, fits into the theme of today's show, but it would be useful in many different parts of your interview. Here's a few more examples of phrases we could use to demonstrate a positive attitude.
In a nutshell, I strive to bring to my work a flexible combination of methodical analysis and strong forward momentum.
Overall, it's consistent high performance that wins the day, and I work hard to embody that long-term commitment in everything I do.
Now we're going to practice two of the key skills we learned in today's show: identifying your weakness tentatively and putting a positive spin on it. First, let's work on identifying your weakness. You'll hear a series of cues stating a problem or flaw. After the beep, restate the problem using tentative language we've practiced, such as sometimes, might, or could, kind of, or a bit of a, and I have a tendency to. Are you ready? Let's give it a try.
I am a perfectionist. I take things too seriously. I work too quickly. I am careless.
How did you do? Now, listen to some example answers. Of course, your responses may differ.
I am a perfectionist. I take things too seriously.
Example answer. I can be a bit of a perfectionist, you might say. Sometimes I might take things a little too seriously.
I work too quickly. I am careless.
Example answer. Well, I have a tendency to work a little bit too quickly, and sometimes this makes me a little bit careless.
Now, let's practice putting a positive spin on the problem. As before, you'll hear two cues stating a weakness. Use the language and approaches that we've studied today to put the problem in a positive light. You might consider employing some of the idioms we learned, such as, it actually works to my advantage, or it can actually give me an edge over my competitors. Let's begin.
I have a tendency to overwork. Sometimes I pay too much attention to details.
Listen now to some example answers.
I have a tendency to overwork.
Example answer. Of course, at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because I am a highly effective and productive person.
Sometimes I pay too much attention to details.
Example answer. But this also gives me an edge over my competitors because I often spot problems that other people don't see.
After you've tried these practices a couple of times, you should be able to craft a good answer for the next time you are asked, "What is your greatest weakness?" This concludes this episode on answering questions about your greatest weakness. We talked about how it's better to be honest in selecting your weakness because this demonstrates sincere self-knowledge. And under the theme Be Positive, we've studied two key skills for responding to this type of query. 1. Present your disadvantage in a positive light. That is, look on the bright side. And 2, talk about what steps we have taken or are taking to overcome our weakness. Finally, we looked at a 4-part structure for responding to the question. 1. Identify your weakness tentatively. 2. Put a positive spin on it. That is, present your weakness in a positive way. 3. Talk about ways that you are overcoming your problem. And 4. Demonstrate a positive attitude to finish.
You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move.
There is one question that you will definitely be asked in any interview. A question for which you should always prepare a response. That is, do you have any questions for me? In this episode, we will focus on how to deal with this question. We'll talk about what interviewers expect from you, and we'll emphasize the importance of preparation. We'll also study how you can use this opportunity to interview the interviewer. That is, to find out whether the company is a good fit for you. Meanwhile, we'll talk about how, for the interviewer, this is a chance to put your company in the best possible light. In the listening, we will return to Yala Santos' interview. Remember, she is an HR specialist at a manufacturing company who is interviewing for an HR manager position in a business unit of a fast-moving consumer goods company, Fun Beverages International. As you listen, try to answer the following questions. 1. What is Yala's first question for the interviewer? 2. How does the interviewer respond? 3. Yala's second question is a little tougher. What does she ask?
Yes, I can see what you mean about cultural differences. Sounds pretty challenging.
Definitely. But it was a really good experience. I feel that I'm much stronger because of it.
Great. Well, I think that's just about everything I want to get through today. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, actually, I do have a couple.
Great.
Okay. First, I was wondering, what would you say is the best thing about working for this company?
That's an excellent question. Let me think about that. I think what truly sets us apart is a genuine commitment to long-term development. There's a strong dedication here to helping people reach their full potential.
Well, as I said, I'm definitely looking for a place where I can grow and make a long-term contribution.
Those are qualities we really value in employees.
Okay. Well, another question I might have is about how the HR department is viewed in this company.
You mean in terms of...
Well, would you say you get adequate budgetary and leadership support from upper management?
I see. Yes. Well, especially since we went to a more matrix-style management system after the merger, we've seen the executive team take a keen interest in setting up strong HR systems in individual business units.
As the dialogue begins, Yala and the interviewer have just finished talking about another topic. Then the interviewer asks, what typically is the last question in any interview, do you have any questions for me? Let's look from the HR perspective at a couple more ways to ask this.
Do you have anything you'd like to ask before we finish the interview?
We'd like to turn it over to you before we finish. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask us about the company?
As an interviewee, how should you respond to this question? This is about interviewing the interviewer, finding a good match. In fact, in some cases, the interviewer is listening to what you ask or don't ask. They want to see, for example, that you are genuinely interested in the position. The best way you can do this is to do your research beforehand and prepare a few questions to ask. Also, you want to be listening carefully to the questions you are asked during the interview and prepare a few of your own in response. How does Yala respond?
Yes, actually, I do have a couple.
Great.
Yala doesn't hesitate. She is expecting this. We should all follow Yala's example. Avoid saying, "No, I don't have any questions," as this would show you have not prepared adequately for the interview. What's Yala's first question?
Okay. First, I was wondering, what would you say is the best thing about working for this company?
This is a good type of question to start with. We want to avoid jumping into queries about compensation and benefits. You don't want to appear as though all you're interested in is money. Save that for the salary negotiation, which we'll deal with in another episode. It might be all right to ask a question or two about compensation, but at the very least, we should first ask a few general questions to establish that we are very interested in the job and that we have thought carefully about it. Also, avoid asking if you got the job. Don't be impatient. And don't ask what the company does. Do your research ahead of time. Finally, though it may well be okay to ask one or two tough questions if you have them, it might be better to open with one or two positive general questions like Yala's that allow the interviewer to first put the company in the best light. Let's study a few more good, general, positive questions that we can ask almost any company as a warm-up to tougher questions.
What kinds of assignments might I expect in the first 6 months of the job?
What characteristics do the achievers in this company seem to share?
How do you feel about creativity and individuality?
What do you like best about your company?
Is there a lot of teamwork?
What projects do you have in the development stage now?
What are your plans for expansion?
Recall that Yala has just asked the interviewer what the best thing about working at Fun Beverages is. How does the interviewer respond?
That's an excellent question. Let me think about that. I think what truly sets us apart is a genuine commitment to long-term development.
From the HR perspective, you should be prepared to answer this type of question because it is a chance to portray your company in the best light in order to recruit excellent prospects. In this case, the interviewer decides to emphasize long-term development. What really sets us apart means what really differentiates us is. The interviewer means that Fun Beverages' commitment to long-term career growth differentiates it from the competition. How does Yala respond?
Well, as I said, I'm definitely looking for a place where I can grow and make a long-term contribution.
Those are qualities we really value in employees.
Yala refers back to a comment she has made earlier. Well, as I said, to emphasize that her values are in line with the company's. Finding a good match, that is, demonstrating shared values or common perspectives, is an important interview goal. Let's listen to some more language for emphasizing shared perspectives.
Yes. Well, obviously, this is an area where I think my values really align with this organization's.
It sounds like our interests really intersect at several points.
I also really value a cooperative, teamwork-oriented working style.
What's Yala's next question?
Okay. Well, another question I might have is about how the HR department is viewed in this company.
This time, Yala is asking a tougher question, one about the relationship between HR and the rest of the company. Notice how she is a little bit more careful with her approach. She says, "Another question I might have is..." When asking tough questions, there are a number of softening phrases you can use, as we've studied in previous episodes such as BEP 49 and 50. Let's review some of these.
I was wondering...
Perhaps you could tell me...
Would it be possible to tell me...
Could you possibly clarify a point for me?
How does the interviewer respond to Yala's tough question? First, he asks for clarification. Then Yala asks her question in more direct terms.
You mean in terms of...
Well, would you say you get adequate budgetary and leadership support from upper management?
As an interviewer, it's important to ask for clarification. This may be especially important when interviewees are questioning you, because they might be shy about asking you directly what's on their minds. By clarifying their queries, you show them that you are truly interested in what they have to say. We've handled asking for clarification in BEP 34 and 35, so those would be good episodes to review. Now, before we finish the show today, let's go over some more tough questions that we can ask interviewers. First, let's listen to some general questions that we can ask about the company, its strengths and weaknesses, and how your job fits in.
How important does upper management consider the function of this position to be?
Could you describe your company's management style and the type of employee who fits well with it?
What are the company's strengths and weaknesses compared to its competition?
How will my leadership responsibilities and performance be measured? By whom?
What are your growth projections for next year?
Now, here are a couple of questions we might be able to ask about salary and benefits. if it's appropriate.
Are salary adjustments geared to the cost of living or job performance?
Does your company encourage further education?
Do you offer flexi time?
Some tough questions you can ask about staffing and turnover include the following.
Have you cut your staff in the last 3 years?
Is this a new position or am I replacing someone?
What is the largest single challenge facing your staff now?
May I talk with the last person who held this position?
Do you fill positions from the outside or promote from within first?
Has there been much turnover in this job area?
How does the interviewer respond to Yala's question about management support for HR? He begins by discussing historical changes within the company. Apparently, Fun Beverages has recently undergone a merger, and along with this has changed to a matrix-style management system. Matrix management means that the organisational structure is flat. Instead of a top-down command and control structure, every employee has several functional managers, and they all cooperate flexibly in teams based on each individual project. Finally, there's one last question you can always ask an interviewer.
What is the next course of action? When should I expect to hear from you, or should I contact you?
In this episode, we've covered a few basics and given you some ideas of the types of questions you can ask. The most important thing you can do to get ready for this part of the interview is to prepare by doing research on the company and thinking up several good questions before the interview. Now, let's practice some of what we've learned. You'll hear a series of cues that consist of question parts. Based on these parts, reconstruct the whole question. Try to use softeners. For example, if you hear important, management, consider, this position, you can say something like, how important would you say management considers this position to be? Let's give it a try.
Characteristics, achievers, this company, share.
Example answer. What characteristics would you say achievers in this company seem to share?
Projects. You. Have. Development stage. Now.
Example answer. Can I ask what projects you have in the development stage now?
Plans for expansion.
Example answer. I was wondering, what are your plans for expansion?
Describe your company's management style.
Example answer. Could you describe your company's management style?
Largest single challenge facing your staff now.
Example answer. What would you say is the largest single challenge facing your staff now?
How did you do? Try doing the practice again to develop fluency. That's all for this episode on interviewing the interviewer. We've talked about how important it is to prepare, and we've seen that this is both a great opportunity to demonstrate our knowledge about the company and to find out more about whether or not it's a good match. Meanwhile, from the HR point of view, this is a chance to portray your organisation in the best light. Thanks.
You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move.
You've had your first and second interviews, you've performed well, and you've been selected. You're one of the lucky few. You've succeeded. You've got a job offer in hand. But now comes one of the hardest parts of the whole process, negotiating your salary. If you make a mistake here, all of your time and effort might be wasted. For salary negotiation, preparation, doing your research, is obviously important. In the internet age, there are many websites that focus on salary information, so investigating the market is much easier than it has been in the past. Knowledge, however, is not enough. We also need to have the confidence to broach or bring up the subject and the tools to bargain up the initial or first offer in order to reach a compromise. You'll only get what you deserve if you ask for it. So, in today's episode, we'll focus on the skills you need to successfully talk money. Fun Beverages International has already emailed an offer to Yala Santos for an HR manager position in one of its Brazilian business units. Yala has written back asking to talk with the HR director, Ted, about the details. We'll be listening to their conversation. While you listen, try to answer the following questions. 1. Why does Ted say he needs Yala to begin work by the suggested start date? 2. How does Yala broach the subject of compensation? 3. How much over the median or average market rate does Ted say Fun Beverages offered Yala in recognition of her skills and experience? 4. What is the final compromise they discuss?
You've seen our suggested start date. Is that something you can manage? Fall recruitment season is coming up quickly, and we could really use your help.
Yes, I can definitely make it as soon as compensation is agreed.
Okay, let's talk money.
Well, just to get us going, can I ask how you arrived at your offer?
Sure. We conducted a competitive analysis of the market leaders and took a high average.
That seems reasonable, but I think I have more to offer than the market average.
I agree. In recognition of your skills and experience, we're offering you 10% over the median.
I see. But don't you think the figure we're working with is a little on the low side for a senior HR manager? In my research, I've been seeing numbers closer to 15 or 20% above what's currently on the table.
Well, to a certain extent, that might reflect the gap between national level managers and business unit managers. For this position, I'm confident we're offering a competitive market rate, especially when you look at the benefits.
I agree that the benefits are great, and so are the advancement opportunities. Considering my salary history and qualifications, though, 20% over your base would enable me to accept the offer immediately.
Honestly, that's more than we have budgeted for the position. But we typically offer 6% annual raises. With good performance, you can get up to 10 or 11%. So I'd say it would be possible to reach your target within a year.
Okay, could we meet halfway and discuss a number closer to 15% initially, then agree on a 10% annual increase with good performance?
That's definitely something we could consider.
I suppose the next thing to discuss then are the specific annual performance targets.
Sure. We have very clear performance indicators and expectations for senior management, right across the business.
It sounds like Yala and Ted are well on their way to reaching a compromise. Let's examine the language they use. As job candidates or employees in a salary negotiation, the first and sometimes hardest thing we need to do is actually broach the subject of compensation. How does Yala bring up money? First, Ted asks her if she can start in time for the fall recruitment season. Recruitment refers to finding and hiring promising new candidates. Fall recruitment usually takes place among upcoming graduates at university. Can Yala make it or start by then? Yes, but only under one condition.
Yes, I can definitely make it as soon as compensation is agreed.
Okay, let's talk money.
Well, just to get us going, can I ask how you arrived at your offer?
To keep the negotiation positive, it's important to focus on what we can do. Yala demonstrates this kind of can-do attitude. She can definitely start by Ted's suggested date as soon as compensation is agreed. Next, Ted says, "Okay, let's talk money." And Yala responds by asking him how he arrived at his offer. The ball is now in Ted's court. That is, the next move is for him to make. Yala has thus followed the two basic rules of bringing up compensation. 1. Be positive. And 2. Let the other side make the first move. In other words, you can start the game, but try not to be the first person to mention a number. We don't want to start too low. Now let's review some more language we can use to broach the subject of compensation.
Before we finish, I'd like to raise the issue of compensation.
I wanted to discuss compensation and benefits with you so that I could get a clearer picture of how you arrived at your offer.
Can we talk about compensation?
How did you arrive at your offer?
I was wondering what factors were considered in coming up with this offer.
What happens next? How does Ted say Fun Beverages arrived at Yala's offer?
We conducted a competitive analysis of the market leaders and took a high average.
Ted is saying that, like many employers, Fun Beverages has surveyed salary levels at its leading competitors. They have taken a high average to arrive at a base salary, or base. That is, the basic salary for the job. Ted is saying that the base of their company is actually higher than that of many competitors. Notice Ted is being vague. Like Yala, he avoids bringing up definite numbers. How does she respond?
That seems reasonable, but I think I have more to offer than the market average.
At this point, it's important for Yala to state her reasons for why she deserves more than the base. To do this, she shows confidence in her ability by saying she has more to offer than the market average. This is a clever move, because Ted is likely to agree with her. Of course, he wants to hire above-average employees. How else, as candidates, can we demonstrate confidence?
I am sure that my skills and experience will be a great asset to your organization. I believe that my skills and experience place me well above the market average.
Your organization needs good people who have what it takes to help the company succeed.
I am sure I can make a strong contribution to your organization.
So Yala has said she deserves more than the market average. Let's listen again to what Ted says in response.
I agree. In recognition of your skills and experience, we're offering you 10% over the median.
Ted is prepared for Yala's strategy. He says that they are already offering her 10% more than the median or average. Now that Ted has brought up an actual number, Yala replies with some figures of her own.
I see. But don't you think the figure we're working with is a little on the low side for a senior HR manager? In my research, I've been seeing numbers closer to 15 or 20% above what's currently on the table.
Here, Yala is bargaining up the 10% over the base salary that Ted says he is giving her. She uses a negative question to be diplomatic. Don't you think it's a little on the low side? Then she refers to her salary research. She says she has seen numbers 15 or 20% higher than the one on the table, that is, the one currently being offered. Let's review some more expressions for bargaining up.
In my research, I've been seeing numbers closer to 15% or 20% above what's currently on the table.
Don't you think that might be a little on the low side?
The offer seems a little low, but I am really excited about the job.
An offer 10 or 15% higher than this one would give me something to seriously consider.
In addition to the phrases we've just heard, another effective strategy is to use silence. Simply nod, say, "Uh-huh," and wait for the person sitting across the table to reply. Often, the more the other side is talking, the better you are doing. How does Ted reply to Yala's attempt to bargain up the base salary? He stays firm.
Well, to a certain extent, that might reflect the gap between national level managers and business unit managers. For this position, I'm confident we're offering a competitive market rate, especially when you look at the benefits.
First, Ted implies that there might be an error in Yala's research. The gap or difference in salaries that Yala is seeing might just reflect or represent the difference between local business unit HR managers and country-level HR managers. Yala is applying for a local business unit job. Next, Ted shows confidence in his offer. He's confident they're offering a competitive market rate, especially when you look at or consider the benefits. Staying firm is a useful negotiation skill for both employer and candidate. Let's look at some more useful language. First, let's study some phrases you can use as an employer.
We're confident that this is a competitive market rate.
That's as high as we can go.
To be honest, that range is outside of our budget.
Now, what can you say to stay firm as a candidate?
I'm confident that I'm asking for a fair price.
That's as low as I can go.
I'm not prepared to accept less.
So Ted is staying firm with his offer. How does Yala choose to respond? She uses very positive language to make her case.
I agree that the benefits are great, and so are the advancement opportunities. Considering my salary history and qualifications, though, 20% over your base would enable me to accept the offer immediately.
When negotiating compensation, it's often important to be very clear that we are not just motivated by money. We should make positive statements about the job and why we think it's a good opportunity. In this spirit, Yala agrees with Ted that the position represents a great chance for her. She discusses the benefits and also the advancement or promotion opportunities. Notice that Yala avoids saying if. She does not say, "If you give me 20% over your base, I will accept the offer immediately." If can also mean if not. So if always includes the possibility of failure. Instead of if, Yala says 20% over your base would enable me to accept immediately. Enable to is much more positive and confident. It emphasizes what we can do and doesn't suggest any possibility of failure. Now listen to more examples of positive language that we can use in making offers and counteroffers.
I'm excited about this opportunity.
I agree that the benefits and advancement opportunities are great.
Some upward movement on the salary would allow me to consider the offer seriously.
An offer 20% higher than what's on the table would enable me to sign the contract immediately.
In these examples, would allow me to works similarly to would enable me to keep a positive emphasis. What does Ted think about Yala's proposal? He says that honestly, it's a little more than they have budgeted for the position, but he brings up annual raises or increases in salary. Typical raises are 6%. With good performance, Yala can expect 10% or more. So it would be possible to reach her target of 20% over the base within a year. In other words, he is offering her 10% now and 10% a year later. Ted finally appears to have made a concession. That is, to give up something in order to reach an agreement. Listen to Yala's response.
Okay, could we meet halfway and discuss a number closer to 15% initially, then agree on a 10% annual increase with good performance?
This exchange represents the key moment in the negotiation, for which the previous discussion was merely preparation. Having first made a counteroffer of 20% over the base, Yala is now asking to meet halfway with Ted at 15%. In addition, she keeps the concession that Ted has already made, 10% annual performance increases. Ted responds positively to Yala's suggestion.
That's definitely something we could consider.
Now let's study phrases that are helpful in reaching a compromise.
Why don't we meet halfway?
That's something we could seriously consider.
That's getting closer to a figure that I can really accept.
We've both made concessions. I think this is a good offer.
We're really excited to have you on board.
I'm looking forward to working here.
How does the dialogue finish? Yala asks Ted to discuss specific annual performance targets for her annual raise. She doesn't want to accept the job only to find later that these targets are unrealistic. Ted assures her, however, that they have clear performance expectations and indicators, that is, clear measurements for performance. Yala and Ted are talking specifics and moving closer to a final agreement. Now let's practice some of what we've learned. First, practice positive language. Imagine you are negotiating your salary with an employer. Use would allow me to and would enable me to make your case. For example, if you hear
5% over your base, start the job immediately.
After the beep, you can say something like,
I'm excited about this opportunity. An offer of 5% over your base would enable me to start the job immediately.
Now you try it.
10% over your base. Consider the position seriously.
Annual raises of 15% with good performance. Accept the offer right away.
Here are some example answers. Bear in mind that there are many possible correct responses.
Example answer. This is a great opportunity. An offer of 10% over your base salary would allow me to consider the position seriously.
Example answer. I'm very excited about this job. Annual raises of 15% with good performance would enable me to accept the offer right away.
Now you'll hear a series of sentences with a verb blanked out or replaced with a beep. Repeat the whole sentence saying the missing word. For example, if you hear,
How did you... at your offer?
you'll say,
How did you arrive at your offer?
after each response, we'll play the correct answer.
Before we finish, I'd like to raise the of compensation. Answer. Before we finish, I'd like to raise the issue of compensation.
I'm sure that my experience will be a great to your organization. Answer. I'm sure that my experience will be a great asset to your organization.
I'm not prepared to less. Answer. I'm not prepared to accept less.
Why don't we meet... way? Answer. Why don't we meet halfway?
That's all for this episode on salary negotiation. We've studied how to broach the subject of compensation, demonstrate confidence, stay firm, use a positive approach, and reach a compromise. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.